All right, good evening. I'd like to call to order the regular board meeting of the Truckee Donner Public Utility District at 6:01 p.m. Wednesday, October 7th. Shauna, could we have roll call, please?
Thank you. Director Finn?
Here.
Director Valiota?
Here.
Here.
Director Ellis?
Here.
President Benner?
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Going to defer the flag.
Took shorter than expected, 70%, so I think that's solid. And then we're holding at 91% respondents say that their issue was completely resolved. So again, fantastic. Customer service is right there. And while I'm on that topic, we are meeting internally at this time to start to address how to enhance our customer service as it has now moved into our mission statement. With regard to meetings, I met with LAFCO to talk about our Wi-Fi delivery, which I'll talk about in a minute. But I wanted to make sure that they understood what we were doing. So we weren't talking broadband. We were talking about this other component, and that was not a service it's not for sale. It's just we're helping out our community. Met with Kat to talk a little bit about our development program, and thank you to Shauna and her crew. They've been working with Mike and his crew and others here at the district to start to streamline that process to help our developers through our plan review and support them as they bring those plans to the town. Met with friends of the library to talk about how the library can work with a broadband solution and how it can fit inside that space. NCPA commission meeting, we had our PTWA Eastern Slope board meeting, which was really great. Got to talk to those guys a little bit and start looking for ways for the Truckee-Tahoe Basin to speak politically through PTWA and talk about some of the money that they're getting out of the Middle Fork project to help those districts up here. And then Aqua Region 3 board meeting, we were setting up for the full board meeting, nothing really new there. Initiatives, the COVID response, we remain continuing to manage for the pandemic as new information comes our way. On the strategic planning front, we had our first board workshop, which you participated in. Thank you so much, everyone. I thought that was highly productive. We have now met with all of the departments here at the district after that meeting to talk about what has occurred, right? So we took information from the department levels. We brought that information up through the SWAT and through the levers. We spoke with the board. We took everything that we did in the board. We took it all the way back down, all the way to staff, and met with the staff, talked them through that, and then started to work on some staff development stuff down at the ground level. The communications, so we formed up a communications team. They're working on the communication plan, which is going to start in December and run through January and February as part of our strategic planning process. And then our staff development team has started to work on what things the staff would like to work on, meaning do they want a leadership academy, do they want to have cross-departmental meetings, stuff like that, really enrichment here at the district. And so that's moving along, I think, quite well. On the renewable energy front, we're currently waiting for Sierra Business Council to finish a couple projects so that they can come in and do our GHG assessment. The town fueling station, that's moving along. Staff is currently preparing the term sheet so that we can come up with an intergovernmental agreement with the town of Truckee so that we can fuel out of their yard and improve their yard to deal with not only our infrastructure, but also the fire department. So it'll be 3 entities working out of that fueling yard, which will be great. Water operations, we continue to work. So Brian's really taking the lead in this. We're working to take the entirety of our water operations carbon-free. So that means working with the registry and preparing the balance sheet for the renewables that we're bringing in to drive those towards our water operations and put that in a box and move that over. And we're doing a great job there. Power operations, as you'll see tonight, we're in the process of developing a renewable energy rate. We're on the fast track for that. We are going to attempt to have that renewable rate structure set and ready to go by the first of the year for the board to approve and move forward. On project, I jumped over project. Who could do that? So with regard to broadband, we are working with the local HOAs right now to find out if there's needs or wants, so that we can bring that back to the board and how those needs and wants can be met by our current facilities. Internally, we're developing the business case for a multiple rollout opportunity. So how do we do that? And we'll be working with the committee to do that. And then we continue to contact other local districts and governmental organizations to help develop a Wi-Fi ring, or not, help us with one of the places where we're going to deploy. We need a little bit of extra equipment, and it sounds like they will help us. So, you know, again, I can't speak more highly of staff. They've done a fantastic job. They've thought outside the box. They've seen a need, and they have miraculously answered that need in such an extraordinary way. Kudos to those guys. So anyway, everybody, you guys have the press release, you have the pictures, and we'll see how we're treated in the news. But hopefully, this one good thing in the sea of not so great stuff, maybe this one good thing will bubble to the top and fantastic. Also, on a high note, is in October this month, the district will spend roughly half a day giving back to the community. So we're going to take staff out to Donner Lake and do a cleanup on 6 miles around the lake. And so the board and anybody is invited to come and participate with us. This is a team building opportunity for us. We also see it as a little bit of a decompression. You know, everybody's on edge. I think this morning the term was, we're tired of being tired. And so, you know, just to get out, do some good for the community, do something good for us, and just take a chill day, I think is very needed. So please, it'll be on October 14th. And so you're more than welcome to come. We encourage you to come. And so with that, Mr. President, that's my opinion.
Wow, thank you. Really good news on the Wi-Fi thing.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
great.
Super
Way to
proud.
go, way to go. That's awesome. Okay, so we're now on to consent. We have items 8 through 15 tonight. And there is some public comment on these, so we should probably hear that, right? Or, I mean, yeah, it's not, oh, I guess it is. Yeah, I guess we could do it. Yeah, let's do that, Shauna. Sorry.
Thank you.
Brain cramp for a moment there.
Dear Mr. President, vendor, and members of the board, there are several items on the agenda tonight for review and recommended approval for professional services, which are clearly contracts for consulting services. District Code 3.08.070 has established the process and procedure for retention of consulting services and outlines a 14-step procedure that includes a request for proposal process with a transparent review of costs for consulting services. It appears that the board has been skirting this important procedure in classifying consultant contracts as special services, which include, but is not limited to, professional services, but further clarifies them, such as legal, engineering, architecture, landscape architecture, land surveying, construction project management, accounting, financial, economic, energy advisory, information technology, environmental, payroll services, administrative services, as included within California Government Code Sections 4525, 4526, and 53060. Many of the services for review and approval for the board at tonight's meeting clearly are not special services and should be reclassified into consulting services and the appropriate RFP process to be followed. It is the right thing to do for the community to improve the PUD's transparency, control costs, and ensure that the monies of our public utility district is collecting from the community, including your neighbors and local business owners, are being ethically reviewed and spent according to the approved district code. If the consulting contracts identified as part of the strategic plan process are approved tonight, the running cost total is nearing $250,000. That's a big expense for a small community-owned utility company, especially when you are asking the community for an increase of water rates, which will contribute to the entire venture. The community deserves to know what the financial budget is for the strategic plan, including consultant fees, outside service contracts, costs, staff time, and contingency amounts for the process. I appreciate your consideration with the points I have expressed and look forward to hearing from a response. Respectfully submitted, Kim Harris, resident and local business owner.
Thank you, Shauna. Are there any questions or comments from the board regarding any of this, and then specifically the public comment? Joe, do you have any questions on this public comment or on any of the consent items?
Okay, now, you stated that there's a couple of these items that don't come under this business consultant.
Well, the comment is, are we really following the district code? My gut feeling is, and I'd like maybe to ask Steve, that we're very conservative on our district code and our ethics and policy and being transparent. So this is actually kind of a shocker to me, this comment, and I believe, for the last 12 years, we have been following the procedures. There are, certain contracts that we can follow with the California contracting law of government agencies, and we're utilizing those to save a lot of money. There's a lot of stuff in here. So I guess, I'm looking for input.
I'm waiting for Steve.
Yeah.
Stephen.
Same here.
So, Mr. President, if you would like to pull any of the items from consent, we could do that and discuss them, and then vote on the other items on consent, if that's what you'd like to do. Generally, items on consent are to be acted on without discussion. Certainly, you or the board member could request an item or multiple items be pulled for discussion.
Okay.
So I'm understanding you're asking to pull some items.
Well, I don't know. I guess I want to see what the other board comments are. Do they feel we need to pull an item? This is very general. Is there a way that we could just generally then talk about our process briefly?
What number was that?
Or not?
No, it's not any specific number.
Oh, there's a couple of studies here, yeah.
Steve, would it be all right to take a motion and a second, and then open for discussion for the board on the consent, as in general?
Sure, that would be fine.
And not discuss specifics, but speak to it generally.
That would be fine if that's acceptable to the president.
Okay.
The board, yeah.
I'm lost there. Yeah.
Oh, all right. Let's go to Tony or Krista. Do you have any comments on that? What Graham just suggested. We look for a motion and second. If there's not any specific items on the consent calendar to pull, then we can then just generally discuss our process.
So I guess I will, there is nothing specific that I want to, but I am happy to address as a whole the consent calendar. So I can move that we, again, I don't want to pull a specific item, move that we have an opportunity to discuss the consent calendar generally.
Well, it would be, you would move to approve the consent calendar. Before I take roll call, we close out and we have discussion, so there will be an opportunity for us to discuss that after the motion and second.
So, okay, so we're just going to move to approve the consent calendar. Sorry, my dog started barking right in the middle of that.
I would like to second.
Yeah, I thought I already seconded.
Yeah, Chris's dog seconded. Is there a second on the floor for the consent calendar?
I'll second it.
All right, Bob seconded. So now we're going to discuss in general our process, which we follow, and which I believe is in a very fiscally responsible manner.
It is. I might let Bren start.
Okay.
I'm happy to answer additional questions, but.
Perfect. So, members of the board, this evening, each one of the items that are up for the vote, each one of those items was brought forward to you as part of District Code 3.8050, which is the procurement for special services. The reason this piece of the code was used is because a number of these contracts are either the continuation of existing work, meaning that the contract was let in 2014 and we're just moving that contract forward in time, and those services have continuity through time. Or they are part of a member services agreement with NTPA, or they are part of our Aqua vendors program. So on a lot of levels, these contracts don't rise to the services level where we're looking for a proposal of service. They're actually providing a very discrete activity to the district. So we use this process, which has exactly the same terminology as the section that was cited by the public, meaning that special services include, but not limited to, absolutely everything that Ms. Harris identified. So it is appropriate, in my opinion, this part of the code gives the general manager the authority to determine whether or not it's appropriate. All of the contracts that you see in the consent item have within them or behind them a process to bring them to the district in this space. So absolutely, in a place where we would be looking for services, where we would be needing to define what the role of the consultant would be to us and be able to shop that out to a greater consultant base, that is absolutely an opportunity for the district to do an RFP, and we would do that. With regard to the comment about the savings, please understand that the RFP process is about the proposal, less about the fee going to be charged. So if you want to talk about fees, we do a request for quote, that kind of thing. We're not really in a low bidder situation. So the cost control concern isn't really inside of what we're trying to accomplish here. This process here is fully within budget, and actually we're still under budget in all of the categories that we're drawing from. And so, yeah, so all the contracts you have before you today have gone through our code process as identified in the agenda, and are consistent with our standard operating procedures and are consistent with either sole sourcing under public code and under contract code and under our code.
Yes, thank you, Wayne. Very good explanation. Is there a thumbs up on a vote now from Lally, Otis, and Finn? I'm going to ask Shauna here for a roll call vote unless you have any other comments or questions.
Well, I have just a quick comment. Just generally, I mean, I was going to put this out there before all of this. I've obviously read the consent calendar, and all of the contracts for it were included, and I did note where they fell within the budget, and everything was within budget. And I was originally just simply planning on saying a lot of the things, this is a really dense consent calendar, and a lot of them are projects that we have really needed. I was just going to say how happy I am to see that some of these, especially the information gathering contracts, it's very hard to make decisions if you don't have data and information. And a number of the agreements on the consent calendar were exactly that, looking for more information on our electrical rates, looking for information from our constituents on what they are looking for from us moving forward. So I was just going to say, you guys have been really busy, and just moving the ball forward for us on situations that we have needed more information on, so we can make good decisions. So I approve of the consent calendar. So that's it. Thank you.
Tony, you were gonna unmute, and now it's your turn. Thank you, Krista.
No, I just, I didn't know if Steve had any other comments to add to Rem's discussion. But just in general, Steve, you're confident that everything on the consent calendar, as far as professional services, is within district code?
I am, Tony. I did review the contracts. I believe they all fit within the category of special services as how we define those in our code, and I think we followed our proper procedures. I will note that our procedures, our code, identifies a different process, as the public commenter pointed out, with respect to consulting agreements versus consulting services versus professional services. And generally, I think we think of consulting services as a very high level strategic type service where a consultant is using expertise and thinking, providing options and guiding us at a very high strategic level, as opposed to providing services on a more tactical level. And I think these contracts fit within that parameter of the tactical type professional service agreement. And as Rev pointed out, one of those is a continuation of services. One, we're utilizing a vetting process by another public agency. Okay, and for those reasons, it makes sense to continue those contracts under this process. I hope I answered your question, Tony.
Yeah, you did. I just wanted the confirmation that you concur that we've followed district code and we can move forward.
Great. Bob, anything else to add?
I have nothing. I think we're being as transparent as you can be. We're not trying to hide anything. With the comments from Rem and Steve, and we follow the code as we're okay on it. I'm with.
Okay. Sean, could we have roll call, please?
Thank you, yes. Vice President Fenn,
Yes.
Director Loliotis,
Yeah.
Director Blair,
Yes.
Director Ellis,
Yes.
President Bender.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. That takes us to our first action item tonight, number 16, approval of notice of completion for the water meter radio transmitter replacement 2020 project. Brian, you're up.
All right.
Right. Good evening, President Bender and members of the board. This is action item number 16. Right, I'd like to start off with a little bit of background just to kind of refresh our memories on the project, and feel free to stop me along the way if you have any questions. It's been a while since we've discussed this topic, but I'd like to start off with a little bit of background. So if you recall, some of you may recall, back in September of 2008 is when the district began the metering project. And part of that component of that was to install or procure and install meters that had an AMR system, an automated meter reading system with a radio and software from Aclara. So each meter in our system, approximately 13,000 water meters, are equipped with an MTU. A great majority of those were installed in the initial installation phase of 2009 and 2010. The MTUs that we, as a district, installed included a 20-year battery warranty from the manufacturer. It was a prorated warranty with the full replacement for the first 10 years and then prorated out for 15 and 20 years. As we mentioned before, the MTU warranty only covers the cost of the hardware and not the labor to install it. And so recently we've had a significant number of MTU failures over the past 2 to 3 years, and that has been in large part because of the batteries themselves. We've discovered, as the manufacturers have discovered, that the intense temperature changes, and then we believe there's an over-optimistic projection of the life of those batteries to begin with, the original version 1 of those batteries. With the weak batteries, the normal functions stop working typically during the winter. Some of these may begin back up in the spring, but ultimately would die out sometime soon after that. We did have an item here with the board in April earlier this year, discussing that over the last winter and the previous fall, the district had experienced about 3,500, just under 3,500 MTU failures, and that staff had recommended that we replace those MTUs as well as any other ones that were existing, those legacy MTUs from the original installation. The intent there, the approach was that if they hadn't failed, they would soon to fail. At that time, the board authorized expenditure of up to $240,000 to purchase the MTUs. It was noted at that time that district would require an outside contractor to assist in these replacements. Of just sheer numbers, we don't have the staff on board internally here to handle a project of that size in a short window of opportunity over the summer. A request for bids was issued in mid-April. We did receive 3 bids. They're outlined here in the chart, and the lowest bidder was Concord Utility Services out of Murrieta, California. The bid amount was just over $318,000, and that was for the replacement or installation of 4,800 MTUs over the course of the summer. The board authorization included a 10% contingency or change order allowance for a not to exceed amount of $350,600. So, new information, where we are now. This evening, very happy to present, thankful for the staff, proud of the staff working with the third-party contractor to get these MTUs replaced. Concord Utility began the installation earlier this summer in June. The project was completed in September, a little over a month ago. The original scope of work was 4,800 MTUs, as I mentioned. The final project completion actually included just over 4,600, and the reason for that is during the course of this project, our staff internally were addressing MTUs as we had new customer sign-ups and other meter issues. So if they went out to do a confirmation of a read or a repair, we would replace the MTU then while we have someone on site. So the final project count with Concord Utility Services was just over 4,600 MTUs. A couple of things I'd like to note just with the board here publicly that there's a couple of kind of residual impacts of the replacement of MTUs. While it's great and we're very happy to have these replacements completed, it gives us a lot of, we can utilize a lot of the functions that are built into this MTU system and the software system. One of the kind of the side effects is that once we install the MTU, the district's billing system receives an updated totalizer from the meter. So if you could imagine that if an MTU radio wasn't functioning over the winter, our staff in the billing system estimates reads until that MTU is replaced. Once it's replaced, an actual real-time updated total water usage gets transmitted back to the system, and that could be less than what was estimated or more than was estimated. And so staff is tasked with reconciling that with customers. So there's a little bit of staff time to address that and working with our customers to make sure they understand why the sudden, the trend in their billing might have changed and once we get that information, conveyed and that discussion happens, it's a positive experience. One of the other effects is that if there was a meter out there where an MTU wasn't functioning over the winter and a customer had a continuous flow scenario or an issue, a leak on their property, without the MTU actually transmitting the information back to the billing system, the alarming systems for that aren't functional. And so what we have is we've experienced it in previous years where a leak occurs over the winter, freezing, all the things we know of here living in the Truckee life. A lot of those leaks are revealed in the spring and the thaw. Well, in this case, they weren't really revealed until the MTUs replaced sometime in July or August. And so there was a little bit of, customer shock there that there was a leak on their property that they weren't able to see. It wasn't that significant, but it does come out in a leak letter. So we spent some time explaining that, and we've gotten through a lot of those. Customers are thankful that this functions. In fact, they can use it again, but a little bit of understanding what happened there during that downtime.
Hey, Brian, some of those batteries, what's up with the 3,000 batteries, didn't even go to half their warranty period?
That's correct.
Yeah, and can they do anything about that? I mean, if they're guaranteed for 20 years and they only last 10, and I know that it's weather related and freeze and no freeze and what have you, but is it that, or can they do something with a battery to make it better?
So great question, Director Aguera. That was version number one, version number one of the MTU, the battery. The newer versions have a longer projected life. There are new updated technology, battery technology increases or improves over time. One of the things we were also able to accomplish, staff was able to negotiate with the manufacturer, recognizing exactly the point that you brought up. The MTUs that failed within the first 10 years were fully replaced by the manufacturer for the warranty. We received a prorated warranty for some of them, and then, as I mentioned, we made the determination that it would be beneficial to replace all the remaining old ones.
That's when we bought this.
We procured those prior to failure at a discounted rate. So we were able to negotiate exactly to your point. They honored the warranty, but recognizing that a significant number of these MTUs were failing early on. So the replacement of the new version we got at a discounted rate.
Yeah, okay.
What's the total number of water MTUs we have in the system?
Just over 13,000. So we've replaced a little over 5,000 in the last 90 days or so.
So what are the differences between the ones the 4,800 to replace versus the ones they replaced?
There's a new battery technology or improved battery technology. So you can imagine we're seeing it all across all of our electric components that we use in our day-to-day life. The original procurement was in excess of 10 years ago. So battery technology is improved. There's also the functions within the MTU itself. Those have now been tailored to have less draw on the battery. So, the original versions were sending lots of data in bulk pieces, drawing down the battery life. So the new ones are sending out in different sizes and different forms of data packages. So as they move along, battery life is the selling point for these MTUs, and so it's improved over time.
So should we expect to be replacing these every year then?
There is going to always be an inventory of these that fail, just like any product, electronic product. Our hope and desire is that we never have to address a mass failure like this again. It's one of the risks of installing a lot of technology at one time. The life cycle moves together. And so in the future, with testing and meter maintenance, so remember, the district has shifted from a capital meter installation phase. Now we have all 13,000 installed. We're shifting to a maintenance phase. And so the amount of work we have to do each year will be smaller pieces of inventory, more manageable with in-house staff and spread out over time. So this, we're the intent here is if the curve kind of flattens, we're not doing peaks of huge replacements down to nothing and back up.
Thank you.
What was I gonna say? Now, when the batteries go out, I think I read that there's no danger or any damage to the ratepayers, end of the line.
Absolutely correct. The MTU is a standalone component from the meter, and so the meter is not impacted. The failure of the MTU doesn't impact the meter's ability to accurately meter water usage and to continue to totalize that information. So the MTU is simply a radio that collects the data from the meter and sends it to the building system. So while it's not working, everything still functions. We replace the MTU, it catches back up right where it left off.
So there's no harm to the ratepayers.
Just the, like I said, the reconciling of the bills at the end.
Yeah, okay.
And then these new units you replaced have a 10-year warranty?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part of the question.
The new units you replaced, the 4800, have now a 10-year warranty?
They're now 20-year warranty.
1 year.
I mean, 20-year warranty?
Yes.
It starts now?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye.
So from a fiscal impact perspective, the original board approval was a not to exceed amount of $350,600. The final contract payment to Concord Utility was $308,051. The approved funding source for this project is the Water Utility General Fund. And the action before the board this evening is to adopt resolution 2020-23, accepting the water meter radio transmitter replacement 2020 project as complete and authorize the filing of the notice of completion.
Is that it, Brian?
And I am available for any other questions you
All right, thank you. Shauna, is there any public input on action item number 16?
No, Mr. President.
Okay. Tony, are you out there?
I'm here, Jeff.
How are you doing, man?
I'm great. Maybe I can just summarize, Brian, that staff is confident that the generation of MTUs that are prone to failure have been replaced for the most part.
Yeah, one of the great questions. One of the things to consider here, this is three has outlasted version 1 significantly, and we're confident that that is a moving forward process. There's always some risk that or manufacturing defects or whatever that might be, but this is version 3 and 4 that we're installing into the ground. And we're pretty confident. We've had those discussions at length with the manufacturer. That was one of our big concerns.
Good.
Thanks, Tony. Krista, any comments or questions on
I
item
don't
16?
have any questions. This has been before the board multiple times in the past year, and I'm still good on what the process was and why it was and why we had to do this. I guess one of the points of interest and concern to me is, again, squaring with our customers why we wouldn't have noted a leak and then the bills coming together to true up at this point in time. And I can see how that could be a challenge for our customer service representatives, and I'm glad they had the patience and some, to get through that process. I think it even happened with me, not that I had a bill that was like, whoa, that was really weird adjustment for my water, just a one-time, one-off thing, but it very likely fell into this exact category. But I'm glad it's behind us. This was a big project. It kept rearing its head up. It seems like a couple times since I've been on the board, so it's a big thing to have finished. I'm happy that it is, and well done. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Joe, you good?
I'm good. I got my questions.
Okay. Bob?
The other question, okay, we have a 20-year warranty on them. What's the life expectancy of these units? Like you said, you're on version 3 and 4, say version 4. What's the life expectancy of those units?
The life expectancy is the mean life expectancy is the 20 years. And so that statistically, that's where that warranty is set up. That was the life expectancy for the previous version. What they hadn't anticipated, and we experienced it, were the effects of extreme fluctuations in temperature.
So in about 10 years, we'll have to start replacing version 1 and 2 or whatever? We'll have to start replacing at that point?
That is something we need to plan for as a district. Basically taking that total cost, we see where you start to ramp up, where they start dying. And because we installed them in the same time period, we should expect a large portion of those, or a larger portion of those, to start failing at about the same time. Whether that's 10, 15, 20, 25 years down the road, we don't know yet, but we should see that kind of same bell curve there.
What is the cost of each unit, and how much do we pay to replace one?
The units were right about $95 a unit, and we were getting prices depending on the version 3 or 4, and we selected those based on availability and distribution, but we were getting prices of around the 70, 75 per unit. So we were getting, a relatively good discount there per unit for all the new ones that hadn't failed yet.
Now, how much does it cost to replace, the average cost to replace one, labor?
Oh, I don't have that available for you. I mean,
Okay.
The estimate would be that it would take to replace a unit, minus, or add travel time or things like that. Basically, staff has to go out to the location, pull the meter box, clip a wire, and resplice the wire with the MTU and reattach it to the box. Give or take some other maintenance issues that might be revealed at that time, but it's probably 15 to 20 minutes per unit. And then that would depend on how closely collected together they are in terms of distribution out in the field.
Thank you.
All right, is there a motion to approve 2020-23 and the notice of completion?
I'll go ahead and move that we adopt Resolution 2020-23 and accept the water meter radio transmitter replacement 2020 project as complete, and authorize the filing of the notice of completion.
And I'll second that.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Roll call, please, Shawna.
Thank you. Vice President
Yes.
Kent? Director Liliotis?
Yes.
Director Torres?
Yes.
Director Ellis?
Yes.
President Hunt?
Yes. Thank you. Okay, thanks, Brian. Oh, you're back again for number 17.
The main event.
The main event, water rates.
Assistance from IT.
You just click forward. There you go. All right. Sharing screen. All right, good evening again, President Bender, members of the board. This is our workshop number 2. This is workshop item number 17 this evening, but it's our second workshop in our water rate study for
2020. But I do have this evening to provide a presentation on the water rate study from HDR Engineering. Before we get to that, I just wanted to go back through the background one more time to kind of recap what we discussed at the last board meeting. It has been a month or so since the last presentation, so just so everybody's back in kind of a frame of mind of where we started. Okay. I apologize. Thank you, Shauna. So as we discussed at the last presentation, the last time the district endeavored on a water rate study and adjustment approval of the water rates was back in 2015. At that time, the board set the rates for fiscal years 2016 to 2020. As you can see from the slide here, those approvals are listed and outlined there year to year. Those rates are set to expire, or that approval of the rate schedule is set to expire here December 31st of this year. And so the reason we are here this evening in the previous workshop was to discuss and set water rates for the upcoming years. Just as a reminder, this whole process is subject to California Proposition 218, or the Right to Vote on Taxes Act. This became effective back in 1997, and it established potable water or public water as a property-related fee or charge. Thus, it's subject to the Prop 218 process. A couple of the procedural requirements we are actually going to ask the board or recommend to the board this evening to approve. The rates do need to be reasonable, proportional, cost-based. There is a notification requirement to the public, which we will get a little bit deeper in detail later this evening. A public hearing must take place, and they're subject to the majority protest provisions of Prop 218. In preparation for this process, the district and staff have entered into a couple of consulting contracts, the first of which was with Far West Engineering to update the district's 10-year water capital improvement plan. The intent here was that updated plan would be used or be utilized to initiate and facilitate the new cost of service study. And then we also brought on board HDR Engineering, who we will introduce here in a moment, to conduct the updated water utility rate study for 2020. As you may recall, we did do a board presentation, a workshop on this updated CIP. Far West Engineering conducted that in partnership or collaboration with the district staff, engineering staff. The presentation on May 20th provided some feedback and some discussion on what came out of that updated study. A couple of key things that we discussed were the need to harden the district's water utility in terms of emergency power supply. These are generators at our water well sources. New water pipelines for system redundancy. Some sections of the district's distribution system were identified that could use or be enhanced and improved with some redundancy. And then included the updated cost for repair and replacement of aging infrastructure. The bottom line from that study, the CIP is identified with the equivalent of about approximately $7 million a year over the next 10 years to complete or accomplish all of the items in that plan. After that study was completed, or the CIP was updated, HDR Engineering was brought on board to address several items here. The cost of service analysis. This is updating what it actually costs the district to deliver services to a customer base. The request was that they utilize the updated CIP They address some of the concerns for unfunded California mandates. There's a packet of, so to speak, of new legislation and mandated requirements for water utilities that will have a bottom line cost impact to the district. So take those into consideration. And then also continue rise in costs that are exceeding inflationary rates. And then finally, evaluate the rate structure. We will get into this with Sean and Kevin, a presentation on how do we set the structure in terms of tiers, the variable and base rates. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Sean Korn to present the findings with the 2020 water rate study. I am going to unshare my screen. And introduce Mr. Korn.
Thank you, Brian. Good evening, President Bender, members of the board. Appreciate seeing you all again this evening. As Brian mentioned, I have an update on the water rate study based on our discussions and review of the information about a month ago now. I'll start off with a previous review of what we talked about last time.
Interrupt you real quick. Your slides are technical difficulty here in order.
There we go.
Sorry about that, Sean. We can hear you, but the presentation slides weren't showing here at the meeting. So if you could kindly start from the beginning.
I can absolutely do that. You all just missed my beautiful cover slide while I was talking most of that time. So as we go through this, what we'll talk about this evening is just really summarize, as Brian discussed a little bit, but compare these current alternatives that we worked up based on the board's discussion and direction at the prior meeting, compare those a bit to what we had discussed at the last meeting, and then really, again, look at this to gain some feedback and information from the board on that preferred capital and rate transition scenario. And if you remember, a rate study is a three-step process. So once we have that revenue requirement established, then we also need to develop that cost of service analysis to equitably and proportionally allocate costs between the different customer classes or the rate schedules that you have in place. And so I have information on the results of that study, as well as proposed rates based on one of the scenarios. And that's something that if the board provides us direction to revise or adjust, then we will make those adjustments to those proposed rates. And then we'll touch briefly on next steps. So from the last presentation, the overall projection of the revenue requirement and development of the analysis has not changed. We've maintained the same upfront assumptions, the same projections of expenses out through fiscal year 2030. We've maintained the same revenue projections with that annual customer growth of approximately 1% per year. And if you remember last time, we walked through 3 different funding scenarios for the board to consider and discuss. And that was a baseline capital funding analysis, which was essentially $3 million a year. We had a medium plan, and we had the full capital plan, which was the Far West capital scenario. So about a $3 million a year, a $4 to $4.5 million a year, and then the $7 million a year capital improvement plan. Those were all being funded through annual rate revenues. So a pay-as-you-go approach where you're funding those capital improvements annually through rates. Based on that discussion, the board gave some direction on what those percentage adjustments may look like going forward. And we, working with district staff, put together 2 additional scenarios. And in addition to the rate funding component of that, we also included in these 2 scenarios an additional long-term borrowing to fund a greater level of those necessary capital improvements to get us up to that target capital funding level of roughly $7 million a year over the time frame that we're reviewing. So as we develop these analyses, these alternatives, we stayed within those constraints that the board talked about, but with that additional borrowing at this time, we were able to meet those capital levels a little bit quicker. So here's an example of the two new scenarios and the 3 prior scenarios. The graph shows the baseline scenario. That's the $3.4 million a year. The first bar, or orange bar. The red bar, or the middle bar, is our scenario 4. That's the highlighted, the 2 bolded numbers, lines down below. That funds an average of $6.5 million per year, so $65 million in total. And then scenario 5 is the blue bar, or the right-hand bar, which funds approximately $7.2 million a year, so $72 million in total. So based on the discussion we had at the prior workshop with the board, you can see that total capital, both of those scenarios 4 and 5, run right between scenario 2 and 3, which was seemed to be the basis for our discussions during that last workshop. So that is, again, with some additional borrowing to fund that, but we're able to meet that within those guidelines that you all provided us last time. Now, what does that look like? Here's the summary of the revenue requirement in the chart on the top. Our orange, for that first part of those bar charts, is that annual base O&M cost. That's the same for all of our scenarios. The scenario 1 baseline is the dark blue, and then we have scenario 4 with the reddish color and scenario 5 with the purple. And so you can see how that ramps up really on that capital funding amount in each of those years. On the bottom, we developed a comparison of the average customer rate based on a 3/4 inch meter and 5,000 gallons. So that's a typical residential home on an annual average basis. I will note that these rate adjustments here, or sorry, the monthly rates that we're looking at here do include the proposed cost of service adjustments that I will talk about later. I didn't want to have different numbers on different parts of the analysis. So these do incorporate what my recommendations will be on the rate design and the cost of service for all 5 scenarios. So what you can see is in 2020, we have our current rate, current monthly bill of $73.56. And as we go out through the fiscal years, starting with fiscal year 21 through fiscal year 25, remember the baseline scenario, we can see that ramps up a couple of dollars a month. We can jump down to scenario 4 and 5, where we're meeting those overall capital targets and funding that greater need for improving the system. And you can see that bumps up at about $7 a month in the early years, and then that starts dropping down slightly as we get out into the out years. What's interesting to me, and I think is important to take into consideration, is scenario 4 and 5 average bill in 2025 is less than that scenario 3 bill. So we're able in scenario 5, as an example, to get almost as much capital, $1 million short from that scenario 3. We're able to get that done for approximately $3 less per month per customer. And so we're able to fund that through that long-term borrowing to meet those capital needs over this 10-year period. Now, the other important aspect that we need to consider is our ending reserve balances. And so you can see here, if you remember from last time, scenario 1, that was kind of essentially our inflationary assumption. We didn't get reserves where we wanted them to be. Both scenario 4 and 5 stair step up to that target level by the 10-year period. So we do get up to those target reserve balances as we look at this over the long term. Again, we're balancing out the use of reserves, issuance of debt every couple of years to fund some of those different projects in the model right now to get us to where we need to be. So how does that compare to some of the other local agencies? We have on the far left of this chart a green bar, which is the average of everybody, runs just over $80. And then as we go across, you'll see the red box. That is those are the new scenarios, scenario 4 and 5. To the right of that, we have some of the other agencies. They have higher monthly bills than what the proposed bills for this next fiscal year would be for the district. That's Alpine Springs, North Star, Tahoe City, and Squaw Valley. And then to the left, we do have some that are slightly lower. North Tahoe, right next to the left of the red box. And then all the way on the far end, we have South Tahoe PUD as part of that. So you can see right in the middle of where some of these other peer local agencies are for you. And again, as I mentioned last time, I think almost all of these agencies have at least 1 year, if not 2 years left on a Proposition 218 to raise rates. A couple others have 3 to 4 years left on their adjustments. So their rates will be increasing as well over this next 3 to 4 year window. So with that, I'll stop before I get into the cost of service discussion and see if there's any questions or comments on these two new scenarios or how we incorporated that analysis compared to those other two scenarios.
Thanks, Sean. Krista, do you have any questions for Sean at the moment?
Not necessarily a question, but as he was presenting the things that I was thinking about, one is this is an excellent time to borrow money. Money is pretty much free right now. You know, there's not, it's the interest rates are ridiculous. That is one thing that came out again, and CPA's discussions yesterday was how if you need to borrow for capital improvements, now is the time to do it. So yeah, that was, I think the other things, I'll have an opportunity later to talk a little bit about some other things that had occurred to me. But I think it's interesting, as you pointed out, how towards the end of the 10-year window, scenarios 4 and 5 end up costing less. So I think that's interesting and useful, and I feel like it is being fiscally responsible to take care of your stuff, which is what we need to do. So so far so good. Thank you.
Thanks, Krista. Tony, any comments or questions?
No, not at this point. All those questions have been answered through the presentation. Thanks, Sean.
Bob, any thoughts right now for the moment, or?
No, the thing that I like is that even in 2025, we're still not over $100, you know, per property on the water side. And I think that's a pretty good goal at this point. And we're right in the middle of all the water districts kind of in this area. It's something to keep in mind in South Tahoe. You know, they don't have the elevation changes that we have here in Truckee. So they're not pumping as much water on elevations as we do. Most of the properties in South Tahoe are within 100 feet of each other elevation-wise, probably 80% of the properties. So, you know, it's expected that their rates are going to be lower than ours just because of that. So I think that's a good point. I like the fact that we're right in the middle of all the other districts. You know, we're not the most expensive, we're not the lowest. In the meantime, we'll be able to attack these projects that we need to go after. And then, you know, like Chris mentioned, getting to borrow some funds to help put this all together at this time is incredibly beneficial with the low interest rates we have right now. So I think it all, you know, either 4 or 5 look very, very promising.
Joe?
This increase is through the duration of the 5 years. And we have a graph every year, we go up a certain percentage like we did last time. Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so the first rate increase, say scenario 4, would be 5.
Would be about $7.
Yeah.
$5.91.
It'd be about the cost of a mocha.
Yeah. That's the increase, or is that the? That's the increase.
Just an increase. So it's right there, Joe, is that you can see from CRC.
I can barely see it, it's really great.
Okay,
But that's okay, I can,
we can make it bigger.
what column, tell me, the bottom one?
We're right here. So scenario 4, we're going from 7356 to 8067. Right, and then, so in 2020, we go from 8067 to 8713. So you're roughly going up $7 until you get to this fiscal 20 to fiscal 24. When it slopes down a little bit, then we see a $5-ish jump, and then again about a $5 jump. So and I think Sean, would you bring up the graph that showed the rate increases with the reserve levels? This one. So here, Joe, you can see how the increases year over year are positioning us to get us to meet our reserves, but also meet our capital program. And, you know, I don't buy a $7 latte, Sean. That's a couple of your lattes, I'll get.
Okay, so the first increase would be five something?
Seven. Yeah.
Starting January.
Yeah.
Okay, and that keeps us to our $3 million.
So then that allows us to up tempo, so we'll start building tempo to meet the Far West capital program, and it'll set us up for borrowing so that we can execute a couple of pretty large scale projects that we can get in the shoe right now.
Okay, now scenario 5 is the one that says $7, 7.5.
Yeah, so scenario 5 does $7, and then continues on that track. So it just doesn't kind of go 7.
Doesn't jump or anything in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
It just says 7.
Yes.
Well, that's
So every year you have to buy one less latte.
Yeah, all right.
Hey, sorry, question. I do have a question now. The budgets or the scenarios that have the budgets presented, the water operations targets, is that where you would find increase in personnel costs, or has that been factored in? Obviously, this level of capital will likely require additional district staff. Has that been factored in?
To a certain degree, Director Laliotis, that the projects themselves carry within them some of the manpower costs. Right now, we're reviewing internally our engineering structure, and right now we're slated for essentially 3 engineers and a managing engineer. We're not fully staffed at the moment, and I think that the 2 AGMs and I are discussing how best to situate our engineering staff to be able to perform not only the $7 million in water capital, but also I think it's a $2 to $3 million ride for electric capital and $1 million annual for what we're calling data systems. So this is gateway project. So right now we're getting our handle on what the true engineering demands are to meet those projects in the field need. But I'm confident that the engineering FTEs that I have now, maybe one more, would be able to execute the capital program and in its entirety.
All right, thank you.
But scenario 5 would be the one that we head for.
That's what staff is going to recommend here.
All right. I think that looks the best.
Yeah, but I think Sean has more to show us to kind of go into the nooks and crannies.
All right, Sean, you're up.
Okay, so what the next step, once we have the overall revenue requirement developed, is to take that into the cost of service analysis. And this really meets the requirement of Proposition 218. And what this does is it provides us a method to equitably and proportionally allocate the cost between the revenue requirement, the cost, to each customer class of service. And so when we look at this, what we try and do, and the reason we do that is so that we avoid subsidies between customer classes or rate schedules, that those revenues or those rates that are ultimately developed reflect how you and why you incur costs. And that's really the driver and the intent behind Proposition 218, so that each customer is paying their, quote, fair cost of the service that they're receiving. Now, one of the items that comes out of the cost of service are our unit costs. So when we get down to the bottom of the cost of service analysis, there's two pieces of data that are important. One is the overall allocated and distributed cost to each customer class, and then which tells us how much of the pie we need to collect. So of our total revenue requirement, how much does each customer class need to collect? And then the second piece is how do we collect that? And that's through a fixed charge and a consumption charge. And so that's what our cost of service looks at as we go through this. So to meet those requirements of Proposition 218, those unit costs ultimately become the first year of the rates for our starting period, so fiscal year 21. That is required based on recent legal decisions over the past 5-6 years. There have been several challenges, and one about a year or just around there after we completed the last rate study, then there was a ruling that really pushed where we need to go now with the cost of service. And so as we go through this, we're going to look at how we allocate costs to the customer classes, and then ultimately how we allocate and distribute those costs between the fixed charge and the consumption charge, because that's ultimately become those rates that we look at. So here's a summary. It's the last two tables in my cost of service analysis. And what we're looking at is the total allocated cost compared to the current revenue. So in the middle of that top graph, there's a number of 14 million. That's how much we need to collect in fiscal year 21. Of that 14 million, we need to collect 12 million, just over 12 million from residential, 1.3 from commercial, and 687,000 from the pump zones. That's that additional pump charge for those folks as we go up the hills. Now, what comes out of that and those unit costs is the bottom right chart. So what we look at for residential, we have a two-tier structure. And so we have to allocate costs to each of those tiers now based on the legal decisions around Proposition 218 to develop what that pricing is going to be. And then for commercial on a uniform rate. So the costs that go into our tier structure or our uniform rate for commercial are commodity costs or average day costs. So how much water and facilities are needed to meet those typical average day needs. And that's the same for all customers. Again, remember, we pulled the pump zone charges out of this. So this is just getting water to the customers at a base level. The second component is the capacity or the peaking on the system. So how does each tier for residential peak on the system, and how do the commercial customers peak on the system? You can see that varies based on how those customers within that tier for residential or for commercial peak on the system. So each has a different component. You add those together to get the total tier pricing for residential and commercial. And underneath that, I have the current consumption charges here in the middle of the page. And you can see the change. So as an example, tier 1 residential go from 78 cents to 99 cents. Tier 2 is 97 cents to $1.40. Commercial, we see a slight reduction. So this is something that we started seeing in the last study. And we did make some steps to start smushing them together, I'll call it, to start reflecting our cost of service results. And so this wasn't entirely unexpected when I started the study, because I knew where we had to go given some of the recent decisions on the legal side. And so this is showing that for that consumption charge for commercial could go down about 54 cents per CCF, per 100 cubic feet. On the fixed charge, on an equivalent meter basis, we add up to $75.74. So about a $6 increase in that equivalent meter charge. So these unit costs are what become the rates in year one. Then we add on our overall rate transition needs over the next 4 years equally as part of that. So when we look at the cost of service, what it does is it provides us for that cost basis for those actual rates that we charge each customer class. And so that becomes our first year. And I usually say that that's really, every time you do a cost of service study, it resets and we start over and we project out over multiple years, and minor things change over time. And so we're able to adjust that. Now the challenge is, since the last study, we have very limited ability to phase in those cost of service adjustments at this time. So that's what a lot of these challenges have been around, is that one customer group or class or subsection feels that they have been overpaying or they're not being treated fairly, and that has driven many of the lawsuits that we've seen over the years. So when we go into our rate design, then we take those unit costs, as I mentioned, and we want to think about how we collect the revenue, the total revenue, and the cost of service. We want to take into consideration any district rate design goals and objectives, and ultimately develop a rate structure that meets your overall revenue needs and targets and are cost-based and equitable. And that's what that cost of service does for us. So here's the current rate structure. For the residential customers on the left-hand side, we only show up to a 1-inch meter, but it's a variable meter charge. So for a 3/4 or 5/8 by 3/4, it's $69.66. For 1 inch, it's $83.09. So the larger the meter, the larger the demand and capacity on the system. So they have a slightly higher charge. And then we have our tiered consumption, 0 to 8,000 and over 8,000. And we looked at that as part of the study as well to see if that tier still made sense. Those tiers still do reflect that typical average consumption as part of the study. We then have the zone charges below that. So 60 cents for zone 2. Zone 1 is that baseline zone that's incorporated. Those costs are incorporated in those consumption charges. And then each zone after that, based on the number of times, essentially it has to be pumped up the hill. Similar meter charge for commercial, same approach, same charges. A meter is a meter. So if you have a 1-inch meter commercial or 1-inch meter residential, you can only get the same amount of water through that meter. So we try and keep those meter charges the same. We do have some larger meter sizes on that commercial side. So we have some of those customers paying a larger fixed charge. They then have a uniform or the same for all units for each of those customers. So here's the projection of the rates over the 5-year period. On the top, we have, this is residential rates. We have the fixed meter charge. You can see that's $69.66, and then just to the right of that, in fiscal year 21, we have $75.74. So that's that unit cost number that comes right down into this. And then we project that out for fiscal year 22 to 25 based on the overall revenue needs of each year. Same with the metered consumption, 0 to 8,000 gallons and over 8,000 gallons. You can see those unit costs come into play, and then you can see those average bill comparisons there based on this is scenario 5 for that. So you can see that dollar change in each of those. Similarly, on the commercial rates, then the same meter charges and meter sizes, it increases by the larger meter size. And then we have that commercial consumption charge, And you can see that goes down from $1.91 to $1.37. So in that first year, there would be that reduction to the commercial rates. And it's really going to vary depending on the size of the meter and the amount of consumption or how many thousands of gallons they use each month. The pump zone charges, then you can see here, those have gone up. Zone 2, which is the second zone, I call it the base pump zone charge, is 60 cents currently. That would increase to 75 cents. And then we adjust that as we go up through the different zones. And then again, that is adjusted out into the future based on the overall revenue needs. So starting in fiscal year 22, that is where everybody goes up equally. Everybody's rates are adjusted at that same level. 21 is our reset year where we've rebalanced between residential, non-residential, and our pump zone charges. And then it's equal after that. So as we go through this, the cost of service provides those cost basis for each of those customer classes, and specifically the meter charge and consumption charge. The rates reflect the revenue requirement and cost of service results. And then we provided rates for up to a 5-year period, and we're expecting a board approval, and if move forward, then that would be implemented in January of 2021. So a couple of the next steps. If we take into consideration any input from the board this evening, we would then refine our final proposed rates, develop that final written report, and that really, along with these types of presentations with the board, become the administrative record to support the overall analysis. And then if directed by the board, then that Proposition 218 process could begin. That would be sending a customer notification, holding a public hearing. So for implementation in January, that would be a December public hearing. And then if there was no majority protest, so if 50% plus one of your customers did not return a protest notice, then the board may implement the rates and move forward with that. So with that, I'll stop and take any questions that the board may have on the overall process or specifically cost of service and rate design.
Great, thank you, Sean. Any initial thoughts? An additional thoughts, I guess? We already.
No, I think we've gone through it with great detail. And I thank everybody that worked on this project. You guys have done a great job. Thank you.
And you like the staff recommendation for scenario 5? Just okay.
I mean, I don't like it, but I think it's necessary.
Right. Yes.
I don't want to pay another
Right.
I have to, but I think for future reducing costs in the future, it's going to be necessary.
Correct.
But,
Joe, additional thoughts?
what was the residential rate per month?
The proposed.
Yes.
So for January 2021, it would be.
Wait, go back.
To the 20 from here.
Right, it would be $80.67, up about $7.
Okay. They're equal that the zone charges and the.
That's just the baseline rate, and then the additional pumping charges would apply based on where you live.
Based on elevation.
Correct.
Richard, where are the, it's right here, the projections of what the average residential bill would be based on the increase. The other slides were the actual rate structure, the base rate versus the variable rate.
No, go ahead.
Okay. You all right? Krista?
I'm good. We have to operate under a lot of constraints that make sense with fairness and equity. But I agree with Bob that we're looking ahead. We need to, stop kicking the can down the road and start some of these projects and make sure that we are, able to provide water safely and effectively for, the future. So, it's time to put the water house in order. And that was a very detailed presentation. And I don't really have any questions about where we landed and why we landed with those rates. So thank you, Sean. I appreciate your clarity.
Great, thanks, Krista. Tony?
No, it was a great presentation, both Brian and Sean. Thank you very much. This is, we're faced with a significant capital expenditure plan. As Krista said, it's time to stop kicking the can down the road. We have a plan, comprehensive plan, and we have a need for revenue to fund that plan to, as Krista mentioned, continue to provide safe on drinking water and into the realm of reliability, fire suppression, and some of the things that have come forward now with our climate and our issues that perhaps 10 years ago weren't at the forefront of what we were talking about. On that was, is the borrowing projected in 2023, is that a strategic year, or is that a reality of when we think we can physically get our hands on some money?
So it's a combination, Tony. It's when we think we can get our hands on the money, and it falls into our stepwise. So in 23, we're in the last year of one of our funding events, and so we're trying to levelize our borrowing over the 10-year period.
Okay. Makes sense. Thank you. That's all I have. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Brian.
Yeah, that's what I want to say is, John, I know you've done a lot of work for us real hard. You have that in the past years, and you've done a good job for us this year. And Brian, I want to thank you too, because I know that you both put in a lot of work in this.
Thank you.
You gotta go up, you gotta come down, you can't come down, you gotta go up.
Shauna, is there any public input on agenda item number 17?
No, Mr. President.
Okay.
President Bender, I do have a few more slides just to finish off.
Okay.
Staff recommendation.
What's the recommendation?
Yeah, Brian, carry on.
We have to have a public hearing.
We're gonna.
Good enough.
Yeah, thanks. 2 months.
That's in December.
Yeah. 2 months if someone makes a motion after Brian's.
Yeah.
So we're okay in the what?
So as Sean has indicated in his presentation, just to recap, what the timeline is for this, September 2nd, we had the initial workshop this evening. We have workshop number 2. October through November would be a period that would satisfy the notification, public notification for a scheduled public hearing. It would be out of the action recommended this evening. December 2nd, 2020 is the proposed hearing date, at which time HDR Engineering would present the final rate structure, rate development, and seek board approval. And then in January of 2020, the first billing cycle after January 1st would include the new rates. Real quick, Sean touched on it a little bit. Prop 218 requirement, specifically with respect to scheduling a public hearing. The board this evening, out of the action, would schedule the public hearing. Staff or the district would be required to provide written notification by mail to the owner of record for each identified parcel which we provide the service. The notification would need to outline the proposed fee change or charge. The district must conduct a public hearing on the proposed fee or change for charge, not less than 45 days after the mailing. So it requires at least 45 days notice to the owner of record within the district. The district shall consider all protests against the proposed fee or charge. If written protests against the fee or charge presented by a majority of the owners of record of the identified parcels, if there's more than 50%, then the fee cannot be imposed. With the staff report that you received for this item, there is what we're calling substantially completed sample of what that notification would look like. On the reverse side of this would be the actual representative fee increase for that would be included with the notification. The proposed mailing would be on or about October 14th, somewhere between the 14th and 16th. It would give us 45 days till the hearing date. Fiscal impact, as we mentioned in the last workshop, this item does include a recommendation to the board to approve and set water rates for fiscal year 2021 through 2025. The board approved rates will have a direct impact on the annual water utility rate generated revenues and budget expenditures for water utility operations and capital improvements over the next 5 years. The recommendations before you this evening are: 1, approved water rates for fiscal year 21 through 25. 2, approve the notice of proposed water rate increases for fiscal year 2021 through 2025 as substantially completed. And then finally, number 3, set a public hearing date for September 2nd, 2020 to receive input related to the proposed water rate increases. And I'm available for any questions you might have.
Thank you, Brian. I think we've fleshed out questions, comments.
One comment that I still have that is sort of related to this moving forward process and notifying our customers about the public hearing. I think that this is a good opportunity to get a little more out in front of, all of our eyes got big when we heard $7 million worth of capital improvements every year for the next 10 years. And we've discussed it and we've had multiple meetings, and we're going to send out this card that's really dull and bland, and the thing in the paper that's just like a real small print we have a public hearing on. It might be if we can sort of include a little more specificity on things that have been identified that are real problems that we have to address, that so people can wrap their minds more easily around why we're asking for this increase. Understand if we think the main line up north is going to explode because of high pressure and age, that's a really compelling reason to pay some more money on your water bill, versus we have identified a number of capital improvements that we need to pay for. Does that make, something that maybe we can, just use a little PR massage as well as just notification that the rates are going to increase? I guess that's what I'm trying to suggest.
We're already talking at the senior management level at this point about how we message this, not only our flyer, which is required and it's structured, but also to help develop a certain amount of communication material so that to help the community understand what and why and how, all those things, right? We want to make sure that they understand what's going on as we move forward. So yes, Stephen's working on it. I'm sure he's watching right now.
I just wanted to make sure that was part of the consideration. Thank you.
My comment would be a very important part of this is improved fire suppression for certain areas of our district. Is that correct, Brian?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So maybe something like that should be stressed in this time of California burning to the ground. So I think that's very important.
Agreed. We'll make sure that's part of the message.
Tony,
Yes, sir.
you're gonna move to, staff recommendation.
I'll move staff's recommendation.
Thank you.
I'll
Is there a second?
staff's recommendation.
Joe on that one.
We got Joe and Chris.
Oh, well, for me, re-election and all that, the water rate.
Right.
Every time we come to this, water rate thing, it's the same thing. We need the money to work on.
Yeah.
We have to keep building our
We have to,
infrastructure.
we have to pick up the can.
And like I mentioned, Mr. Cornell, that, he does a bang up job for us every time we come to this point. And he seems like, I can't say it's a win-win thing, because the rates do go up. But he comes to a point where it's workable for us, and it's not that severe that it doesn't hurt us. And that's why I don't want to second that, because I figured, well, it doesn't matter every 3 or 4 years. And we have to do what we have to do, and that's what we have to do, what we did tonight.
Right.
Well, the thing to keep in mind is our rate increases have been very low
Very
in
low.
the last five
Right.
years, I believe. So, when the economy was, pretty rough, and the economy is rough for some people right now, but not for others. But, we're trying to mitigate that with some of our programs.
Right.
To help those out that need help. But in the meantime, the general economy is ramping up right now, and we're going to some past years it wasn't. So I think hopefully it won't be a financial hardship for ratepayers.
So we have a motion and a second. Roll call, please, Shauna.
Thank you. Director Laliota,
Yes.
President Fenn,
Yes.
Yes.
Director Ellis,
Yes.
President Fenn.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Board.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Special thanks to APR and engineering as well. Thank you, Sean.
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you all. Good seeing you again.
All right, that's it for action items. We have some routine business. Number 18, approval of the treasurer's report, September 2020, including approval of the treasurer's report of fund balances for the month ending July 31, 2020. Is there a motion?
I'll move to approve the treasurer's report of fund balances for the month ending July 31st, 2020.
Second. Sean, roll call, please, since we're zooming still.
Yes, please. Director Laliota,
Yes.
President Fenn,
Yes.
Director Rivera,
Yes.
Director Ellis,
Yes.
President Fenn.
Yes. We got some bills for August 31st,
I mean, we pay
2020.
the bills, the business for the month ending August 31st.
Thank you, Joe. We have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Director Laliota,
Yes.
Yes.
Vice President Fenn, Director Rivera,
Yes.
Director Ellis,
Yes.
President Fenn.
Yes. Okay, we have a treasurer's report of fund balances for the month ended in August 31st, 2020. So we have another round. That the other one was for July. This is now for August.
All motion to approve the treasurer's report of fund balances for the month ended August 31st, 2020.
Second.
All right, thanks, Joe. Motion is second. Sean, a roll call, please.
Director Laliota,
Yes.
President
Yes.
Fenn, Director Rivera,
Yes.
Director Ellis,
Yes.
President Fenn.
Yes.
Thank you.
19B, more disbursements for September, Joe. We did August.
Move to pay the bills, for September. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, yeah, there is September.
Yeah.
I'll second it.
All right, motion and a second, again.
Director Liliota,
Yeah.
Yes.
Vice President Ben,
Yes.
Director Ellis,
Yes.
President Pender.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we have some minutes from September 2nd, regular meeting. How do those look? Perfect.
No misspelling. I'll move to approve the minutes of September 2nd, 2020.
I'll second.
Roll call, please.
Thank you. Director Liliota,
Yes.
Yes.
Director Morris,
Yes.
Director Ellis,
Yes.
President Pender.
Yes,
Thank you.
thank you. It appears there's nothing left on the agenda.
Wow.
So, let's adjourn.
I moved it.
Okay. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.
All right. Well,
See you, Tony. See you, Chris.
did you notice